so happy to be here today with Seth List, who is joining me from Canva. And, this is a topic I'm passionate about with diversity, inclusion, and allyship and how we can all be better allies. So happy to have you, Seth. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Jen.
Yeah. So anyone joining us, let us know where you're coming from, whether you're watching us live or your team replay. I find it amazing how many people come in like well after the live has gone on and will shoot me messages that it was great and all of that. But I'd love to know when you're joining because maybe I need to change the time of this. I don't know. But it would be really helpful to know that. So, Seth, why don't you tell everyone about yourself?
Oh, big question. So I've been in the sales development world for, almost 15 years now. Landed my first gig back in 2008. On the personal front, and part of why I'm here today, at least my perception of it is I'm a trans man. So I grew up female. I spent the first 25 years of my life as a woman. The first few years of my sales career as a woman in sales, and then transitioned on the job. And so the notion of allyship, diversity, inclusion are all very, very close to my heart. And I find that as humans, we tend to be afraid of things that we don't know. And so I like to participate in conversations like this just to, bring folks who may not know that they know a trans person a little bit closer to the experience to build some empathy and understanding.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for just sharing a little bit about your story. And that's what I really appreciate you doing this is I don't know that many trans people. I'm going to be completely honest. I might know one or two, but I'm not even sure. Right. And how do I make that okay and just be a better ally? And I think that's really important. So thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. My one disclaimer is simply I'm one person. My experience is not necessarily representative of the entire trans community. It's broad and diverse, but I'm more than happy to share personal experiences and my thoughts on allyship.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I advocate for women a great deal, but I realize that my journey isn't the same as everybody else's, and everyone has their unique journey and their unique voice and what makes them, the lessons they've learned and the experiences that they've had. Each individual brings something different to the table. I think is really important to note about diversity. So tell me, when you think about inclusion and allyship, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think not to wax poetic, I think a big part of it for me personally is approaching new situations, new people with an element of transparency and a willingness to be vulnerable. I find that leading by example on that front often helps the person on the other end to break down walls. And the more I learn about how equity and inclusion are different, the more I tend to focus on the inclusion piece, which is not only how do I create a diverse team or a diverse organization, but how do I make folks that are not straight, white, male, kind of prototypical categories of privilege, how do I make those folks truly feel included? And to do that, you have to get to know people. And so again, my approach has always been to just be vulnerable, right? Come out, share my story, and invite others to share theirs with me as they feel comfortable. I find it fairly easy to be open and transparent, and others don't. So I think the other part is being patient and understanding that not everyone from a marginalized group is necessarily eager to talk about it, and certainly to coach others on how to be good allies to them. So it's a tricky dance. I can't say that I've nailed it yet. Definitely not an expert, but I try every day, and I think that's a good first step in my book.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Someone has suggested to me once that they suggested to me that I create an about me document where I go into some of my things that I'm vulnerable about. And, a good part of leadership is sharing those vulnerabilities. But after doing it and sharing it with someone, I felt sort of exposed, right? And they didn't share one with me, even though I've left that open. And obviously they don't have to, just because I've laid it all out there and I've shared this thing because someone suggested that was a good thing to do. Doesn't mean anyone else will want to share with you. So it is hard to put yourself out there when you have experiences and things that you might want to share but don't know, and I think that's why that psychological safety, but also being in an open environment is so important.
Yeah, I think there's also there's kind of an element for me at this point in my life and my career, right? I'm starting to come out more frequently,
Mhm.
and as compared to living my life as a very out lesbian, my identity as a lesbian was kind of out for the whole world to see. I was the little girl who never cut her hair. I had a braid that stuck out, down past my waistline, and then I shaved my head, and it was a very clear signal to everybody in my life that like something had changed about my identity. Whereas as a trans man in the world, I have to come out, like I have to disclose that information. And so, for me, there's an element right now, as we talked earlier about me onboarding new staff members. I'm trying to normalize it, to let go of the need for reciprocation, right? I share a personal fact about myself and you return in kind, and instead just operate from a place of this is normal. This is normal to share personal details about who I am outside of the workplace. And that's not just gender identity or sexuality or religion. It's just kind of allowing ourselves to be human at work. I don't know about you, but I grew up in sales at a time where the adage was leave your personal life at the door. And I fundamentally rejected that. I didn't even quite know how to not be myself uh, in a work environment, right? Because it's where you spent most of your waking hours with people that you started to forge relationships and bonds with. And so I've tried to carry that forward with me throughout my career, which is to say I rejected the adage, right? I am going to intentionally bring my personal life to the door. And again, as a leader of people, both leading by example and just starting to normalize it, right? That we are a whole lot more than what we see in each other day to day, sitting behind a machine or on a Zoom, and how we just start to create a conversation around that. And what I've found is that the opportunities to be an ally, to provide support or encouragement in a new way for people tend to surface fairly organically when you kind of set the tone as a leader that this is normal stuff to talk about, that we're people above and beyond just our jobs, and how do we get to know each other in a way that allows for these types of connections and support relationships.
I love that. I think that is super insightful, and thank you for sharing that. Lydia has a question here. As everyone is waxing ecstatic over Bezos' almost space flight this morning, I've been reflecting the makeup of the team. Uh, in one way, yeah. Um, I mean, that's an interesting thought. And then we've got Catherine who says fostering humanism in the workplace and leading by example. Yeah, and I think that's super important. Not only leading by example, but I think normalizing. I think is the phrase that I will take away. That if it has to be okay that you can bring your whole self to work, right? And that you're human and that there are things going on. I'm a parent and I have children, and I like, you know, it's there are things that are unique about me. I've been in some not great workplaces, and I've got, things that I work on because of that. And so, it has to be okay that whoever you are, whatever you've experienced, that's just part of the journey. So that's great. So what are some ways that we could be better allies, or I could be a better ally rather?
I mean, I think the first thing is just acknowledging that we all, irrespective of upbringing and again, gender and race and ethnicity and religious backgrounds, that we all have opportunities to be allies to someone else. When we play the greater than or less than game, right? When we think with a mindset that my only opportunity is to be an ally to someone in this perceived disenfranchised group, we miss out on a whole world of possibilities to be an ally. So my personal angle when I think about allyship, before my conscious brain kicks in, the first thing I think about is how can the broader world be an ally to the queer community, right? The LGBTQIA plus. An eye-opening moment for me a few years ago. I was working for a company that was facilitating monthly conversations just about how we interact in the workplace. And a colleague of mine brought up a really important point, which was that he is a recovering alcoholic. And so we had a whole discussion about how happy hour, like company sponsored happy hours where there was a large focus on consuming alcohol, made him feel very excluded and made him feel like he had to make a very difficult choice between participating and risking his sobriety versus opting out, and what that meant for his relationships and social capital within the business, right? I can't say offhand I would have thought prior to that moment that I had an opportunity to be an ally to someone that at face value was a straight white man, right? But was struggling with addiction and working to maintain sobriety, right? I had an opportunity to be an ally for him, to drive change within the business, to create a more inclusive environment for him. Parents in the workplace, right? I think COVID, quarantine, working from home has highlighted some issues with that notion. When we frame things as work-life balance, it negates the fact that all of these things are interrelated, right? And especially working from home, especially for parents, single parents, right? There's an intersectionality between their work and their life. We have to acknowledge that, right? And for those of us, I don't have kids myself, right? How can I be an ally to parents who may really be struggling? I have a colleague at present that's got 2 young kids at home, and he's working from home full time. It's challenging, and it requires me to make a choice, either to be a hard ass and give him a hard time about not making meetings and protecting time for his family, or to work around his requirements in his day-to-day life and acknowledge that his life at work is infinitely harder than mine because he's got 2 small children running around at his ankles most of the time. So I think opening the aperture a bit, thinking about allyship in a broader way, and again, just being forthcoming about who you are, opening the door for someone to reciprocate in kind and give you a little insight into who they are and where they might be facing challenges that you can help with as a supporter and an ally.
Yeah. So having said all that, I get a lot of questions about how to bring yourselves to LinkedIn. That if you want to show up as your whole selves at work, right? That with your personal brand, whether it's okay to show up that way on LinkedIn, and whether and I've asked myself this a time or two, when I start talking about some of the challenges I've had in the workplace, with my journey to being a mother and having miscarriages and things like that, and how that impacted me both personally and professionally, how much is okay, right? And usually I say, it's whatever you personally feel comfortable with. But when I reflect on what you're saying about normalizing, and I wonder whether maybe I haven't been giving the right answer. So I just wanted to pick your brain on that.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because I've been on LinkedIn. I was a recruiter before I was in sales development. So I've been on LinkedIn since, 304. And that platform has certainly evolved. And with it, we've seen the proliferation of true social platforms, Twitter, more specifically, things like Facebook and Instagram. And that notion of we as humans, what differentiates, I'm in the thick of reading, I had it and then I lost it, The Paradox of Choice, right? Mm-hmm. Humans special is autonomy, the freedom to make choices for ourselves. And so I think it's really a question that each individual has to answer for themselves, which is how out or how visible do I want to be on this medium where I have the choice to be as transparent as I personally choose to be, but that's not to say that there won't be implications, consequences, ramifications, the second and third order consequences of being your full self online.
Yeah.
And I've seen some folks do it really, really well, but it's a commitment, right? When you make a commitment to be kind of that out, whatever out means for you, it's hard to walk it back, right? The internet is a place of semi-permanence, and that you put it out there once, and even if the post gets deleted, things go viral. You should assume that if you say it once online, that it's there forever, that everybody knows. And so for me personally, for a long time, I did not disclose that I was trans in the interview process because I didn't feel that it was relevant to the job I was applying for. Now, I could try to pitch you on why, having lived as a woman in a sales role and then transitioning on the job and seeing it from both sides of the gender equation, makes me a stronger SDR or a stronger leader. But the truth is, practically speaking, my trans identity has nothing to do with my qualifications for the job. And I'm not seeking opportunities to be hired based on that alone, right? I'm not looking for, affirmative action or to
Yeah.
be that diversity hire.
Mhm.
But I'm someone who kind of lives out loud to the degree that at some point I feel like I've forged a strong enough connection with another person that not disclosing my identity is a lie by omission. So there's kind of a line. There's no official line for me, but a point at which I decide that it's appropriate to share and come out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Um, that's certainly not something, not how I looked at it before, but like I definitely understood there are definitely consequences, right? Depending on how much you want to share and at what level. And at the end of the day, you have to do what's right for you, right? Each individual person on their unique journey. So thank you for sharing that. Uh, so how do you, like a lot of organizations are looking to bring in more diverse talent for that diversity of thought. How do you go about doing that?
Um, I'm learning. Truth be
Yeah.
told, I've been fortunate at Canva in that shortly after I joined, we brought on an HRBP to support those of us working and living in the States. And uh, I got to say, it's like the first time I've really had an opportunity to work so closely with an HRBP, to better understand how do I approach this as a hiring authority. I
Yeah.
can't say that I know all the tricks. I think for now it's simple to the extent that anybody qualified for the job gets an interview, right? And I have the benefit of I'm hiring for the most part entry level SDRs, right? So again,
Hmm.
aperture is wide open. I'm interviewing anyone whose resume uh, is complete and doesn't include spelling or grammatical errors, right? So making sure that I'm interviewing a diverse talent pool so that when we get to those finals, ideally, I've got representation outside of, I mean, Austin is largely a white town. And so I'm doing my very best to just allow candidates into process with more diverse backgrounds and upbringings. And we talked earlier, I'm not relocating talent to Austin, but Austin is a hot spot right now. We got folks
Yeah.
moving here every day. And so allowing anyone and everyone that meets the requirements to come through. In fact, if I could, I would blind names and not look at LinkedIn profiles to try to bypass the unconscious bias, right? We all have it. I think
Oh yeah.
to lead ourselves to believe that I am not biased in any way is a fool's errand. We all hold biases and they're unconscious. They're called unconscious for a reason. We are not conscious of them as they're happening. And so doing the small things to try to get out of that mindset of this is the profile I need to hire and those people look like this, and simply saying, I'm open to anyone and everyone. Let's see what happens when they get into the process. And then bolstering it again, just from a hiring standpoint, with a very consistent and well-structured process. Every candidate gets the same experience because that's another way that I can eliminate opportunities for bias, both in myself and the others on my team that are interviewing talent.
Yeah. No, and I agree. We all have bias. I did a episode with David Massover, where I met him and I sort of prejudged him. You know, he wrote the uh, Salesman's Guide to Dating, and it was a book about that compares sales to dating, which there's that alignment. It's not, um, ironically, I had him come and join my LinkedIn Live, and at that up until that point, I had only had like women guests. So I literally did the same exact thing that he did when I had called him out on it. And he had more guests, and we're friends now, we're great friends, and he came on and we talked about it. But acknowledging that I literally did the same exact thing that he did with, I'm going to have a live show. Let me bring on all my friends first, and they're all just like me, right? And so having that diversity and then acknowledging that we all have these unconscious biases without even like realizing it. It wasn't until I invited him to come on that I go, oh my goodness, I just did exactly the same thing without even like realizing it. And being able to acknowledge that and say, okay, well, I need to be more diverse and not just call out people who are not showcasing diversity. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it was that lesson learned.
it's not my story, but it's one that I like to relay. I had an opportunity to see a D&I leader speak. She's a queer African American woman working for a global Fortune 500, and leading their global D&I efforts. And so she told this story at a conference about attending a DE&I, summit, hearing a gentleman speak who, at first blush appeared to be a straight white man. And so she approached him after the fact and said, the content was good, but I have to be honest, I had a little bit of trouble hearing it from you. And he said, why? And she said, well, you're a straight white guy talking about diversity. And he just looked her in the face and said, am I? And it turned out that he was gay, right? And that's not something that you can read by simply, looking somebody up and down. And so to hear this, queer African-American woman deep in the trenches of D&I relay this story, acknowledging her own unconscious bias, it kind of blew my mind, and really forced me to, I think same with your experiences, to fight that urge to look at somebody, their LinkedIn profile, their picture, their resume, their Facebook profile, and their friend group, and make assumptions about them, because then everything we do in our interactions with them typically is in pursuit of validating that assumption. So instead, and a hell of a lot easier said than done, but how do we eliminate the bias and come into new situations with an open mind, right? And some people are still going to be jerks, not worth our time, may live up to the stereotype, but we have to, in my opinion, allow people to show us that, right? And to go into it with an open mind, that they may actually be somebody other than who I believe them to be based on, all of the data points at my fingertips.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, seek to understand, but also that open mind, I think is especially key, because it's easy to judge, right? It's always easy to look at someone's LinkedIn profile and come up with your perception, which, then you meet them and you're like, well, maybe I wasn't right on there. So always glad to hear your thoughts on these topics, Seth. So Gibran.
That's Gibran. Hi, Gibran. Glad you made it.
The Fast Company Queer 50 list, introducing the first list of women and non-binary innovators in business. Oh, that's interesting. I will have to check out. I will have to check out that list. Thank you, Catherine. Catherine's awesome. She always finds all of the interesting tidbits of information and drops it into the feed every time she joins one of my LinkedIn lives. So, well, let's shift gears a little bit. And you are an SDR nerd, self-proclaimed.
Yes.
What do you love about sales development?
For all the years I've been identifying as an SDR nerd, I'm not sure that I've actually pinned it down. My story is that I moved back to Austin in 2008. I was actually working at a recruiting firm with a slightly different business model. And so I was looking for opportunities to validate whether or not I could actually sell this. And my father actually connected me to a founder CEO here in Austin that was hiring. And I ended up leaving the recruiting firm and joining Bazaar Voice back in 08 back then we were called market developers. And I just fell madly in love with the function. At that point in my career, I'd done candidate sourcing, full cycle selling on the probably small to maybe mid-market range as far as deal size. So Bazaar Voice for me was the first opportunity to be in a true enterprise sales environment. What I realized is I just much preferred and found myself much more effective on the conversation opening side of things as compared to the deal closing. And then staying in it, I grew up playing team sports. I'm the oldest of four. I think I'm hardwired to kind of coach and participate in team environments. And so there came a point where I'd kind of hit the ceiling as far as what I could do and practically speaking, earn as a sales development rep. And so I was forced to pick a path, right? And most of my peers were going from sales development into closing roles as account executives, sales directors, whatever you call them. And it just didn't feel quite right for me. And so I decided to lean into kind of the coaching mindset and aptitude and see if I could, turn myself into a decent manager. And I've worked pretty hard at it over the last 6-7 years. I'm an external processor, experiential learner. I do a lot of talking with thought leaders and people I respect to get their insight and opinions on how they navigate challenging situations and tackle goals and all of that. And so the combination of coaching and, my practical experience and successes as an SDR, SDR leadership for me has been a really perfect blend and marriage of those two things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, my career looks more like a jungle gym than a ladder. I started out in retail leadership, and then moved over to managing cigar bars, and then had someone come in that was a software salesperson to use my conference room to do their demos and then buy cigars for their clients and sign their contracts and then go home for the day. And I was like, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. I want to be that guy. So, I got into software sales and went from an individual contributor to eventually a leader. So I've been everything from green screen DOS all the way to SaaS and software. But it's been a fun journey. Um,
Yeah,
so
before I got into technology, my teens and early 20s, I spent years throwing pizza at a pizza shop, like literally, tossing dough in the air.
Mhm.
And then 3.5 years working for a small private company that it did in-home care for people with disabilities, like entirely different world altogether. And I can't say I went looking for sales, but sales found me and I really enjoyed it. And so now at this point in my life and my career, I get a lot of joy out of helping folks with varied backgrounds looking for a new or a different or a fresh start in technology sales, to bring them into the fold as SDRs, right? That's the organic starting point.
Yeah.
And, I really want to do everything in my power, not only to set them up for success in the role they hold today, but empower them and arm them for future growth. Because even though it wasn't my path, SDR to account executive, it is still the path for quite a few folks. And so just being a part of that journey for new talent in sales development, whether they're fresh out of school or have spent, 10 years in an entirely different industry, that's a really rewarding experience to be kind of right at the start of their journey into this tech space, because it's fun and exciting and a little bit terrifying and constantly evolving. Um, so
I
yeah,
like the
it's fun
speed.
to see people get that joy.
Yeah, no, I like the speed too. Like it's just constantly evolving and technology changes so fast and it's kind of amazing. Well, we're at about time. And so this went really fast.
Flew by.
But you've shared so many like just thoughtful things and I really, really sincerely appreciate it. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I mean, I think maybe just recapping, Catherine's done a fantastic job of kind of calling out some of those sound bites, but yeah, I think normalizing some of these potentially sensitive or vulnerable conversations in the
Yeah.
workplace is a great way to lead by example and open the door for folks around you, colleagues, employees to kind of respond in kind. I said it at the start. I think as humans, we tend to be afraid of the things that we don't know, and so find opportunities to get to know people that are different from you. Um, Try to approach it without pretense or expectation, right? Because ultimately, it's their choice whether to share in kind or not. But if you have an interest in being a better ally, you got a responsibility to share a little something about yourself to open the door for that. Because simply approaching someone different and saying, "Tell me how to be an ally," in my
Yeah.
experience, is not a very effective strategy.
Well, and I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So thanks so much for joining me. And thank you, everyone who joined us. Next week, I've got Rocky Voria, who's going to share her journey and how to get more women in sales. She's a global director of business development for IBM. And then I'm also looking for moms for my next ladies happy hour. So if you're a mom out there and want to talk about some of the things going back to school and all of that, I'm looking for about 6 moms. So to join me. Everybody have a great afternoon and we'll see you next week. Thank you, Seth.
Thanks so much, Jen.